Serious, what are some creepy stories from your culture? Story 1. I have some stories from the Philippines that scared me when I was a child. Here are my favorites. There are these ghouls known as aswang. Many variations of these ghouls exist between cultures, but what is usually common between them is their ghoulish appearance. Long tongue, bat wings, hunting during nighttime, their diet of unborn fetuses, and their salt and garlic weakness, as well as their weakness in sunlight. Maria Lebeau, she is once a hard-working OFW and a mother of 3 children. She became an aswang from someone overseas and came back to her home, where she supposedly cooked her 3 children and fed it to her husband. Of course, her husband finds it out, and he slashes her face with a lebeau, or some kind of machete. That's where she gets her name. She escapes and runs off into the wilderness, hunting children. Tick-tick or walk-walk, a kind of aswang. Its prominent feature is that it tricks its prey through its sounds. When you hear tick, tick, tick loudly, they are far away. When you hear it quietly, they are near. Mananagagal, also kind of aswang. During the day, she's a normal woman, doing normal things. But at night, she grows bat wings, detaches her lower torso, and flies off in search of pregnant women. The only way to kill her is to either hide her lower half or put salt on it. This way she can't reattach back and will die in direct sunlight. Tiyanak. It's a baby demon that disguises itself as a lost baby in the forest. When a traveler notices said baby and attempts to rescue it, it'll go back into a baby demon and kill the traveler. White Lady. This is a ghost woman that appears in haunted houses and besides roads, acting as a hitchhiker. She's called White Lady because she wears white clothes during her apparitions. The most popular version of the White Lady is the one from Balete Drive. There are also many encounters of ghosts such as headless priests and Japanese World War II soldiers, as well as a lot of haunted houses. Oh boy. These stories from the Philippines definitely sound like they would give anyone the heebie-jeebies. Aswang, Managal, Tiyanak? Yikes, these creatures sound like something straight out of a horror movie. All in all, these stories from the Philippines definitely gave me the chills. I think I'll stick to watching rom-coms from now on. Story 2. I've got some nice ones from De Drovsnik in Belgium. Number 1. Toe cutters. The Nashinders, who cut off children's toes when they walk barefoot through a field. Story 2. The black dog, or werewolf, local variant, who jumps on your back. Then you have to carry him to a graveyard, where he jumps off. Number 3. Lauder med the carrot, Lauder with his chains. A BDSM enthusiast, who follows you when you're alone at night, rattling his chains to scare you and being a general stupid. Very similar to the aforementioned werewolf. Number 4. Serapton monster, or something similar like Puteville, greenhouse wall monsters. A monster that lives under the lids of greenhouse wells and pools in children, then drowns and devours them. Number 5. The ruins of a monastery in the Sonian forest that was burned to the ground, where it's said you can still hear the monks and nuns chant in the night. 6. Dogen, the eyes. A feminine where you can suddenly get enveloped by smoke, see a bunch of eyes and some burning people, possibly connected to the monastery if you look at the description of burning people in the Sonian forest. And a lot of witches, white wives, ghosts, bandits, etc. The Wild Hunt even made a pass through my village. How to prevent them? Simple. Make a cross, carry a crucifix, listen to your parents and the parish priest. And don't be a child. Not necessarily creepy, but interesting nonetheless. It sounds like Belgium has some seriously spooky legends lurking in the shadows. I mean, toe cutters, black dogs, werewolves, BDSM enthusiasts with chains, greenhouse wall monsters, and chanting monks and nuns. Sign me up for a ticket to Belgium. It's fascinating to see how these legends and myths have developed over time, and how they continue to capture our imaginations. Whether you believe in them or not, they definitely make for some interesting stories to tell around the campfire. Story 3. The Brothers Grimm collected stories of folklore throughout Germany during the 19th century. Amongst them are plenty of famous and often dark fairy tales. One example is the famous story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. During the 13th century, the city of Hamelin suffered from a great plague. rats. The people of Hamlin were out of their wits. One day, though, a stranger in colorful clothes appeared and promised them to get rid of the rats for an appropriate payment. The citizens agreed and promised him a generous reward if he succeeded. The stranger was a skillful piper and played a melody on his flute that made the rats and mice of the city to gather around him. Enchanted by his music, they followed him when he stepped into a nearby river where they drowned. The piper had fulfilled his promise, but the people of Hamlin denied him his reward. The stranger left angrily and without payment. Sometime later, though, he returned and played his flute once more. This time, it was the children of Hamlin that fell under his tune's spell. He led them out of the town and into a cave under a mountain. Only 2 of the children returned, one blind, one mute, unable to tell where they had been. None of the other children were ever seen again. There are plenty of variations of this old folktale, but the gist usually remains the same. The Brothers Grimm? They certainly know how to collect some spooky and dark folktales, don't they? The Pied Piper of Hamlin is definitely one of the most famous, and also one of the most eerie. It's definitely a haunting tale, and one that's even been retold and adapted countless times over the years. But it's also a reminder of how powerful stories can be, and how they can stick with us a long time after we've heard them. Story 4. The rap-battling horse skull of South Wales, the Mary Lod, Welsh pronunciation Malud, is a wassailing folk custom found in South Wales. The tradition entails the use of an eponymous Hawaii horse, which is made from a horse's skull mounted on a pole and carried by an individual hidden under a sackcloth. It represents a regional variation of a hooded animal tradition that appears throughout Great Britain. The custom was first recorded in 1800, with subsequent amounts of it being produced into the early 20th century. According to these, Mary Lud was a tradition performed at Christmas time by groups of men. They would form into teams to accompany the horse on its travels around the local area. And although the makeup of such groups varied, they typically included an individual to carry the horse, a leader, and individuals dressed as stock characters such as Punch and Judy. The team would carry the Mary Lud to local houses, where they would request entry through the medium of song. The householders would be expected to deny them entry, again through song, and the 2 sides would continue their responses to one another in this manner. If the householders eventually relented, then the team would be permitted entry and given food and drink. Story 5. In Romania, I grew up on a farm, and my grandma and her sister were super religious, but they also believed in folktales. This one folktale said that each year on a specific night in summer, forgot the date, sorry, the date of the Suneze, these mythical forest nymphs would come out and play their instruments together around town. You were never supposed to go outside if you heard music playing, because it was their way of drawing people out. My grandma's sister told me this story about a person from their village who was working late on the day and didn't want to go home. As he was working, he heard folk music and the sounds were getting closer and closer, so he hid in a haystack. He then overheard the sound of a string breaking and a female voice saying, "Oh no, my guitar string broke." And then another voice said, "Oh, don't worry, maybe that man over there can help." And they apparently took one of his muscles from his leg and used it as a replacement for the string. And since then, that man never walked on that foot, ever again. This story used to scare me so much when I was little, and I never knew if they made it up entirely, or if it was a tale passed on through generations. But it was super creepy. Romania has some seriously creepy folktales to scare the pants off of unsuspecting children. I mean, forest nymphs who play instruments and lure people out with their music? That's some next level creepy stuff. Maybe Grandma and her sister were just messing with you, trying to see how far they could push your fear levels. Or maybe they were trying to scare you into behaving, like some kind of twisted Romanian version of the boogeyman. Story 6. Here at Galicia, Spain, it's the Santa Campana, Holy Company, a procession of tortured souls that roam the roads at nights, clad in hooded white robes and led by a trapped living person carrying a heavy cross. They are never going in your direction, but you'll meet them at a crossroad. If you are ever to cross paths with them, the living lead will pass on the cross to you, transferring the curse and switching places with you. There are many legends on what to do to avoid such fate, but only 2 are consistent anywhere you ask. The first, to draw a circle on the ground with a branch of holly and stand inside it, looking away. The second, to stand on the steps of a crucio, Calvary, a holy cross built in crossroads. And when the cursor tries to hand you the cross, reply with, I already have my own. Touching the crucero. That's why in any old crossroad here in Galicia, there is a crucero. I know of some older people who swear on their lives to have met Santa Campana coming back home late at night and to be saved by a crucero. So, who knows? Story 7. Nakan. A man that is surrounded by a body of water, usually rare, and plays his violin to lure children into the water. Maran. A woman born on the Friday the 25th of December. She sneaks into your room at night and kills you. But she has some OCD of sorts, and you can fend her off by leaving a pile of cow hair on your windowsill. She'll have to count them all, which hopefully leaves you with enough time to wake up. Edit. Get quite a lot of comments on this one, so allow me to elaborate a bit. I'm from Sweden, and there are a few stories I've been told about when I was younger. Naken is the about Hargamen, as someone else said, and Maran has several iterations. Some say it's sleep paralysis, others say it's a demon. I've always been told it's a demon that is created if a girl is born on a Friday that is also Christmas Day. Whoa, Naken and Maran sound like some seriously spooky legends from Sweden. A man playing his violin to lure children into the water? That's straight out of a horror movie. And don't even get me started on Maran, a woman born on Friday the 25th of December who sneaks into your room at night and kills you? Just make sure you have some cow hair handy if you're ever in Sweden on that day. Story 8. Tokoloshe in southern Africa. The creature itself didn't scare me, but seeing how genuinely fearful grown men in villages got at even the suggestion of the creature was terrifying. Something very unnerving about seeing what true belief of these small demonic kinds of creatures was. The culture of witch doctors and rituals was very, very strong and real to many people. I once saw a schoolteacher run out of class screaming bloody murder and never came back to school after some kids joked about cursing her with one. Seeing people grow up in small villages without internet, it's easy to see how things can spread. And along with no modern medicine or doctors, death often come with more spooky causes, such as a witch or demon, rather than an explained disease. Some rash forming, probably a demon possessing you, rather than the fact you got an infection from a spider bite. Story 9. Charlie No Face, or the Green Man. This is a real story. His real name was Raymond Robinson. When he was a boy, he climbed an electric pole to reach a bird's nest, but was shocked and became deformed. He lived with his relatives when he was an adult, but he would rarely leave during the day. At night, though, he went on walks, but he mostly hid from neighbors. When he didn't, he would smoke and have a beer. This part is the urban legend and not the real story. When the Green Man was a boy, he climbed up an electric pole and he shocked himself. He fell to the ground and lost his eyes, his nose, an ear, and an arm. When he grew older, he hid in an abandoned building. He got the name the Green Man because of the color of his skin became after he got shocked. Here is the Wikipedia article about him. I had never heard of Charlie No Face or the Green Man before, but what a fascinating story. It's amazing to think that this was a real person and that he had to endure such a traumatic experience as a child. It's heartwarming to know, though, that he still enjoyed simple pleasures like smoking and having a beer. Story 10. Might not be well known, but here in Australia, we have the Min Min light. Basically, if you follow or try to catch this guy, you are never to be seen again. It is said that it predates European settlement, so it isn't some colonists taking half-caste children at night. We also have the Yowie, which is like the Australian Sasquatch, and the Bunyip, an aquatic dog-like creature that drags children and women to their watery graves. There are also various rumors of big cats living in the outback. A few planes went down in between World War I and World War II. As a result, these cats were released into different regions of Australia, the most common being the Penrith Panther, or Blue Mountains Panther. We even named a football team after them. Sightings were that common. I have heard of instances similar to this all up and down the East Coast, so personally, this is likely true. Story 11. This is a Mongolian myth. My grandma told me this when we were in the countryside, where there's very little human interaction. She told me that after it's dark, or you go outside alone while herding, and if you go far enough to not see the chimney of the yurt you're living in, a ghost or spirit comes and makes you faint and have a seizure. The way you know the ghost is near is when an animal of your herd starts to have a seizure, and their mouth bubbles up. If you're fast enough and see the chimney of your yurt, you may be able to avoid the spirit, but most likely by the time you realize what's going on, you're gone. I don't remember if you die by the end of it or just left there. Even so, it was a pretty creepy story when she told me about it, especially when it was after sunset. Story 12. 1. Krampus. 2. A legend about a glacier from my region. Some farmers got so rich from their land that they used pure silver as cowbells, bathed in cow milk, and they made their streets from cheese and butter, so the devil may have something to eat as well. At some point, a poor traveler showed up at their doorstep, asking for shelter, and they cussed him away, shouting, "The devil shall give you shelter." But then, thick clouds came towards them from the mountains, called the Devil's Horns. They do look like the name suggests, and it started to snow heavily. The farmers tried to make their way down to the valley, but they never made it, and their wealth and houses got crushed below the eternal ice. Story 13. I'm Puerto Rican, and when I was little, my mom told me a story about a lady who many believed her father was the devil himself because she was born with animal-like features. She had a normal foot and supposedly had a hoof like a cow's and a tail as well. She would limp because the cow leg could never bend, and since people were always picking on her, she never left the house, so she was always alone. It is unknown what happened to this lady, but stories range from she went to live with her dad in hell, she was killed in a fire, or she was murdered and eaten by someone. My guess was she was just born deformed, and people around that time, 1950s to 1960s, didn't know what that was like, and Puerto Ricans are extremely superstitious. It's sad to think that this lady was shunned by society because of her physical appearance. It's possible that she was just born with a deformity, as you suggested, and people simply didn't know how to handle it back then. But it's also possible that there was more to the story than meets the eye. At the end of the day, it's up to each of us to question what we hear and to think critically about the stories and legends that we are told. Story 14. Ano was the beautiful sister of Jokuhan. Jokuhan, having lost a singing contest to the old man, Vanahoman, promised his sister's hands and feet to Vanahomanen. Anos' mother was pleased to marry her daughter to such a famous, well-born man, but Ano did not want to marry such an old man, so rather than submit to her fate, Ano drowned herself. She later returned as a perched to haunt Vanahoman in his grief. This is a story from Finnish Karelian national epic, Kalevala. There's also a famous painting of this story, by Ozeki Galangalea. I guess this isn't really all that creepy, but that's the best I got. Story 15. La Llorona. If you're Mexican, you know her story. If you're not, let me tell you then. La Llorona was from Mexico, who had given birth to twins, but the father left them. So that meant she had to take care of them herself. But she couldn't handle their crying, so she drowned them in a river somewhere. But she didn't mean to kill them, but it was too late. They were dead. Then later on, she killed herself, and people were saying that you could hear her in the streets saying mijos and crying loudly. Most parents use it as a lesson to listen to them, or she will kill you. La Llorona's story is a tragic reminder of the consequences of our actions and how they can haunt us long after we're gone. It's a legend that will continue to be passed down from generation to generation, reminding us of the importance of compassion and empathy. Story 16. Small town in upstate New York. There used to be a train station there back when people actually took passenger trains anywhere in rural areas. Fairly well-off guy, well-known in town, comes racing into the station right before midnight. Seconds later, a huge, old-fashioned jet-black train with nobody aboard. I mean, nobody rolls into the station. No schedule shows a train arriving for another hour, but there it is. Guy runs through the booth and jumps onto the train. Train rolls off into the night. Nobody ever saw him again. Story 17. Nun Yunubi, Stoneman, and Ulutan Spearfinger are both myths from the Cherokee tribes that were in East Tennessee. Stoneman would devour the souls of villages. Spearfinger would kill anyone who wandered into the forest alone by stabbing them through the neck with their spear-shaped finger. Who'd have thunk it? And then eat their livers. She would then shapeshift into her victim's likeness to gain access to the village and would kill the family of her original victim, also eating their livers. Story 18. People in my town spoke of deer woman. Origin story differs, but I was told a woman was killed and buried on top of a deer. She would chase people at night and was known to harass motorcycle riders, even going so far as to jump onto the back and ride along while laughing hysterically. There's an old bridge on the outside of town, and she was especially known to haunt the area around it. Story 19. It's not really a story, but it's a mythical creature. It's like a centaur, but the head is the horse part and the rest of the body is human-like. Kinda depends from which region it's being told. It's called tikbalang. Basically, to reproduce, they rape women. It's usually a story told to me and my female cousins when we were younger. It was used to scare us and make sure we don't misbehave, and for years, I had this really huge fear of going out when it's dark and sleeping alone. Story 20. The Drummer Boy, Edinburgh. This story says once the government found a tunnel that was too small for a fully grown man to go down. So they sent a boy with drums and told him to walk down the tunnel and keep drumming. They followed the sound of the drums, and at one point it stopped. The boy never returned. Some people say that if you stand in the right place, you can still hear the drums. Story 21. There's a monk ghost story about an old couple where the old woman thought that her husband was stroking her hair at night. Nope. It was a weird creature with crazy long arms that was reaching through their window at night. They never saw the whole creature, just the long arm reaching through the window and stretching way off into the forest. That's why you shouldn't put the head of your bed near the window. Oh my goodness, that is seriously creepy. I have to admit, I'm a bit of a scaredy cat when it comes to ghost stories, and this one definitely gave me the shivers. It's definitely a good reminder to be cautious about where we position our beds, especially if we have windows nearby. Who knows what kind of creepy crawlies or ghost apparitions might be lurking outside in the darkness. Story 22. In Oxfordshire, UK, there's usually a fairly obscure creature of legend called the Boneless. It's purported to be a sort of protoplasmic blob that ambushes and suffocates travelers on lonely paths. A thing made me scared to walk to and from the bus stop. It was a rural area by British standards. I had to walk across a few fields and through woodland to get there from home, for a decade of my childhood. Story 23. The Babal. Parents tell their children that the babai are waiting under their beds. When the child gets out of its bed when it actually should be sleeping, the babai takes it away from its parents. It's never said what the babal looks like, so that the children can imagine something that they think is really scary. Sorry for my bad English. Story 24. Mal Orgillo, the evil eye. This is common in a lot of Mediterranean cultures, but old Sicilians just take it to the next level. I remember hearing stories about evil wizards and witches who would cast the evil eye on me if I wasn't careful. I wore a cornucella up until I was like 13 to protect against it. Story 25. Patroika. A queen once noticed that blood of one of her female servants made her skin look younger, and would slaughter her young female servants and bathe in their blood ever since. I don't remember exactly how the legend goes, so feel free to correct me. But this is more or less how it goes. Story 26. I'm half Polish, so one thing I've heard of is the Rosatka, water nymph, a woman who was killed before marriage. And if it's an unfair death, or if no one avenges her, she will stay on the earth as a Rotsuka, who lures men and kills them by doing a dance, or a tickling motion. That's all I got. Story 27. Nahual. Ancient creatures that predate the ancient cultures around here, that walk to this day. Skilled sorcerers that can transform into animals and attack people, steal babies, eat kids, and of course, curse you. Story 28. Cuban here. Not creepy, but many years ago, we imported the first mummy we possessed. Since the customs needed to label it somehow, it was labeled as conserved meat, as in food. Story 29. It's not really a story, but I'm Woodlands Cree, Native American, and we have a strict rule to not whistle when the northern lights are out. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.